Coming to you live from Nairobi, Kenya. Welcome to Africa Focus, where we bring you news from across the continent right here on Switch TV Kenya. My name is Joel Church and our sign language interpreter is Tracy Dorcas. Start interacting with us on our social media platforms at Switch TV Kenya, to Joel Chacha M on Twitter, and as well on Facebook, Switch TV Kenya and Joel Chacha. Send in an SMS via 22999. But first, here are stories making headlines. The World Health Organization (WHO) has declared that Africa is free of the virus that causes polio. Talks between West African nations and Mali's new junta have ended without a deal. Former Mauritanian President Mohamed Abdelaziz released by police after undergoing week-long questioning over suspected embezzlement. We begin with Africa Roundup stories.
Algerians say they are against the November 1st referendum on a revision of their constitution, advocated by President Abdelmadjid Tebboune and aimed at responding to the powerful protest movement calling for a profound change in the political system.
I think that the project of revising the constitution is done in a bit hurry, choosing the date of November 1st, which is a symbolic date for Algerians. I think it's not the right time. In addition, there are several important points in the project that should have more debate among the entire political class, including the opposition, the post of deputy prime minister, the intervention of Algerian army abroad, and separation of power.
Algériens à l'étranger, la séparation du pouvoir. Donc, surtout que les revendications de Hirak aussi.
The demands of Hirak too, they must be concretized. They must have a place in this new constitution. For the moment, we see that it's almost the same constitution of that of Bouteflika, where all the powers are in the hands of the president. The separation of powers is not guaranteed to this day. We are still in trouble.
À ce jour, donc on est toujours dans l'embarras. Et
si on parle de la forme en choisissant la date du 1er novembre qui appartient à tous les Algériens, sur le vote, il y aura beaucoup d'Algériens qui seront contre le vote. Je ne vois pas pourquoi cette date qui est symbolique, qui devrait être fêtée par tout le monde. Secondo du projet, aujourd'hui la scène politique est...
Today, the Algerian political and social scene, I think, does not allow us to go towards a referendum for the constitution, especially since the project of this constitution has not been worked by all Algerians and all the people on the political scene.
Travaillé par tous les Algériens et par toutes.
Hundreds of young Libyans protested in Tripoli for a third consecutive day to decry deteriorating living conditions and corruption amid a heavy security presence. Voicing anger at extended shortages of power, water and fuel in the oil-rich North African country, the demonstrators, including teenagers and children, marched through the capital again on Tuesday and converged on Martyrs Square. They are also taking aim at what they say is official corruption, and some carried signs bearing slogans including "The corrupt must be put on trial." The demonstration took place even after Fayez al-Sarraj, head of the UN-recognized Government of National Accord, sought to appease protesters on Monday by announcing he would conduct a cabinet reshuffle. The World Health Organization on Tuesday declared that Africa was free of the virus that causes polio, a landmark in a decades-long campaign to eradicate the notorious disease around the world. The WHO said poliovirus now joins smallpox on the list of viruses that have been wiped out in Africa. According to the UN agency, since 1996, eradication efforts have been prevented up to 1.8 million children from crippling lifelong paralysis and saved approximately 180,000 lives. Poliomyelitis, the medical term for polio, is an acutely infectious and contagious virus which attacks the spinal cord and causes irreversible paralysis in children. It was endemic around the world until a vaccine was found in the 1950s, though this remained out of reach for many poorer countries in Asia and Africa. In 1988, when the WHO, UNICEF and Rotary launched the worldwide campaign to eradicate the disease, there were 350,000 cases globally. In 1996, there were more than 70,000 cases in Africa alone.
Moving on, Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara has been formally chosen by his ruling party to run for a third term in an October election, despite furious opposition charges that the move is unconstitutional. Ouattara, who has been in power since 2010, said in March he would not stand again, but changed his mind after the death of his anointed successor, Prime Minister Amadou Gon Coulibaly, of a heart attack in July.
Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara party's decision provoked outrage among young opposition supporters who took to the streets to voice loud and violent protest in several major cities. The constitution limits presidents to 2 terms, but 70-year-old Ouattara and his supporters argue that 2016 constitutional tweaks reset the clock, allowing him to seek a third. Opposition and civil society groups saying his standing again amounts to a coup that risks triggering chaos in the world's biggest cocoa producer.
In my capacity as Senior Vice President of RHDP, by virtue of the powers vested in me, I hereby nominate you on 22nd August 2020 as the RHDP candidate in the presidential election.
After Ouattara's re-election announcement earlier this month, mass protests descended into 3 days in violence in which 6 people died and 100 were injured.
All bona fide observers are well aware that being in the Third Republic, there is no retroactivity, and nothing prevents me from being a candidate.
Il n'y a pas de rétroactivité. La Constitution, elle a été votée par le peuple.
The Constitution was voted for by the people, that is to say, by all of us. But on 31st October, let us go to the elections, and the people of Côte d'Ivoire will choose. There is no need to go and put up tree trunks, break buses, burn houses to prevent someone from standing for election. You know why they are doing this? They are scared. When there is a new constitution, it means that everything starts all over again. Alassane Dramane, Ouattara's competitor, starts from scratch. He is at the first mandate of the Third Republic of Ivory Coast.
On Friday, election authorities rejected appeals by Gabo and former rebel leader Guillaume Soro to be allowed to run in October. The 2 men had appealed to the Independent Electoral Commission against a decision to not include them in the electoral list for the ballot. Gabo was freed conditionally by the International Criminal Court in The Hague after he was cleared in the 2019 of crimes against humanity of the 2010 election unrest. Daniel Kariuki for AfricaFocus.
Elsewhere, Tripoli residents have reacted after Libya's warring rivals administration announced separately that they would cease all hostilities and hold nationwide elections, drawing praise from the United Nations, the European Union and several Arab countries. The surprise announcement followed multiple visits by top foreign diplomats to Libya in recent weeks and came after a series of agreements and pledges that, however, have failed to be implemented.
Friday's statements were signed by Fayez al-Sarraj, head of the UN-recognized Unity Government of National Accord GNA, based in the capital Tripoli, and Aguila Saleh, Speaker of the Eastern-based Parliament, backed by military strongman Khalifa Haftar. The UN's top official to Libya, Stephanie Williams, welcomed the move and called for all parties to rise to this historic occasion and shoulder the full responsibilities before the Libyan people.
God willing, peace will prevail in Libya and will unite Libyans between the East and the West, and will free the country from wars. This is an initiative for the good of Libyans, and it will bring Libyans together. It is a good initiative and we hope it will succeed. We hope this peace initiative will come 10 years ago, not today. God willing, peace and security will prevail in Libya. We want to return to the way we were before, when there was no east, west, north or south. It's a good initiative and will be the best for all the country and all the people. From the east and the west, from the mountains to the coast, from all the religions of Libya.
Libya sits atop Africa's largest proven crude oil reserves, and earnings from its lucrative oil fields have been a source of intense disagreement between the two sides. European Union diplomatic chief Joseph Borrell hailed an important and positive initiative, adding that it was crucial now that all parties stand by the statement. Sarraj called for presidential and parliamentary elections next March and for the end of all combat operations. Saleh also backed elections, though he did not specify a date, and urged all parties to observe an immediate ceasefire and cessation of all fighting. Both leaders called for the resumption of the production and export of oil, a cornerstone of Libya's wealth. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who backs Haftar and had threatened to deploy troops in neighboring Libya, said he supported the ceasefire declarations with Libya's former colonial power Italy, also welcoming the move, as did France, Germany, the Arab League, Qatar and Jordan. The French Foreign Ministry said the ceasefire announcements must be released on the ground and called for an end of all foreign interference in Libya. However, Libya has been torn by violence since the 2011 toppling and killing of longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi in a NATO-backed uprising. Daniel Kariuki for AfricaFocus.
Away from that, former Congolese President Pascal Lissouba from 1992 to 1997 has died in France at the age of 88. According to spokesman for the Pan-African Union for Social Democracy created by the former leader in 1992, he says President Lissouba passed away after short illness.
Former Congolese President Pascal Lissouba, who in 1992 won his country's first multi-party presidential elections, died in France on Monday at the age of 88. Lissouba died in Perpignan, southwestern France, and the death was confirmed on Facebook by his son Jeremy Lissouba, who is also a lawmaker. Lissouba was president of the Republic of Congo, also called Congo-Brazzaville, to distinguish it from the neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, from 1992 to 1997. He fled to France after being overthrown in a brief civil war by the current president, Denis Sassou Nguesso, who had lost the country's first multi-party elections in 1992. Born in Tsingwidi, in the southwest of the country, Lissouba studied agricultural engineering, gaining a doctorate in France in the late 1950s during the final years of colonial rule. In the 1960s, he became Minister of Agriculture in the newly independent country before serving as Prime Minister under the then-President Alphonse Massamba Debat. In 1991, Lissouba set up UPADS as international pressure pushed Sassou Nguesso, a French-trained paratrooper who came to power in 1979 to organize a multi-party vote. But his historic victory the following year was marred by clashes that broke out in 1993 between armed groups of the country's ruling and opposition parties that left around 2,000 people dead. In October 1997, Sassou Nguesso returned to power, ousting Lissouba with the support of Angolan troops after a 5-month conflict that claimed between 4,000 to 10,000 lives. In 2001, the High Court of Justice in Brazzaville sentenced Lissouba in absentia to 30 years forced labor on charges of treason and corruption. The Republic of Congo has high revenues from oil, but many of its roughly 5 million people live in deep poverty. It is ranked 179th out of 189 countries on the 2019 UN Human Development Index and 165th out of 198 countries in Transparency International's 2019 Corruption Perception Index.
Meanwhile, Tunisia's Prime Minister-designate unveiled the country's second government in 6 months, which must now seek approval from lawmakers incensed by how the administration was formed.
Tunisia's Prime Minister-designate on Tuesday unveiled the country's second government in 6 months, which must now seek approval of the lawmakers incensed by how the administration was formed. Hakim Mechichi had previously declared his intention to form a cabinet dominated by independent technocrats able to present urgent solutions for a country where a sluggish economy has been further battered by the coronavirus pandemic. The former interior minister's decision to bypass consultations with political factions had angered, among others, the powerful Islamist party Ennahda, which has demanded a political government reflecting the balances of forces in parliament. But Ennahda and other parties have also spoken of the need to approve the government to avoid dragging the already crisis-hit country into disruptive early elections.
I renew my personal commitment to the independence of this government, but also to cooperation, mutual respect and interactions with all the components of the political scene and all the parliamentary masses. We will try to ensure that this government interacts directly with all components of the political spectrum as well as with political parties for the benefit of Tunisia citizens.
The impasse further hampered a fledgling democracy ushered in by a revolution 10 years ago that has since struggled with regional inequalities and a pandemic that has wiped out thousands of jobs. Ennahda won the most seats in the last year's poll but fell apart short of a majority and eventually agreed to join a coalition administration. Parliament is set to vote on Mechichi's lineup in the next 10 days. Amina Hussein, AfricaFocus.
Time to now take a breather. Stay with us here on AfricaFocus. Still to come. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo meets Sudan's Prime Minister to urge more Arab countries to normalize ties with Israel. Welcome back to Africa Focus. My name is Joel Church and our sign language interpreter is Tracy Dorcas. Moving on, paramedics and ambulance services are on alert in Johannesburg on the first weekend night since the alcohol ban and travel restrictions were lifted. The ban was meant to reduce accidents and ease pressure on hospitals amid the COVID-19 crisis. The South African government on Monday lamented alcohol abuse, which is said to dampen efforts to curb the spread of COVID-19. South Africa lifted the ban on alcohol sale on August 18th with the easing of restrictions following the tapering of COVID-19 infections. However, the move has led to alcohol abuse, which is blamed for the recent state of fatal accidents.
It wasn't an unusual night. The incidents that we had were standard for the industry, but it was unusually gruesome, I must say. I don't know if it has anything to do with a lockdown that's been lifted, but I don't think it's a coincidence. If the infection rate and the hospital admissions, because of corona does not decrease rapidly, and the amount of non-COVID related hospital admissions increases rapidly because the lockdown is lifted, or to a large extent cigarettes and booze, and movement is slightly more free, then we are going to encounter a problem, and the beds that were reserved for COVID patients are now needed. It's not always successful what we try to do. Sometimes it's not even up to us. Sometimes what happened before we got there was just too severe to do anything about. So yes, that's why I feel a sense of relief when we treated someone and it was successful.
On to other news. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met Sudan's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok in Khartoum during his tour to urge more Arab countries to normalize ties with Israel following the U.S. brokered Israel-United Arab Emirates agreement. Mike Pompeo's visit to Sudan marks the first visit by an American chief diplomat in 15 years.
Pompeo, who is the first American top diplomat to visit Sudan since Condoleezza Rice went in 2005, arrived on a historic first official non-stop flight from Tel Aviv. Israel remains technically at war and has no formal diplomatic relations with Sudan, which is an East African country which for years supported headline Islamist forces under its former strongman Omar al-Bashir. But its new joint civilian-military transition government has vowed to break with the Bashir era following the ouster last year amid enormous pre-democracy protests. Pompeo met Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and Sovereign Council Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan for talks which would express U.S. support for deepening the Sudan-Israeli relationship. Sudan, which has launched sweeping social and political reforms, hopes Washington will soon take it off its blacklist of state sponsors of terrorism as it seeks to fully reintegrate into the international community. Hamdok wrote on Twitter that he and Pompeo had a direct and transparent conversation regarding delisting Sudan from the terror list on bilateral relations and U.S. government support. Washington wants Sudan to forge ties with Israel, and both sides have already taken a series of steps despite some mixed messaging from Sudan. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met Burhan in Uganda in February and later announced that the two leaders had agreed to cooperate towards normalizing ties. Sudan's cabinet later denied that Burhan had made such a promise in a context where the topic of normalization remains highly controversial in much of the Arab world. More recently, Sudan's foreign minister spokesman Haida Badawi indicated Sudan could favor such an accord, but Foreign Minister Omar Kamardina then said the issue had never been discussed by the Sudanese government and promptly fired the spokesman.
Elsewhere, talks between West African nations and Mali's new junta have ended without a deal on how the country should return to civilian rule following last week's coup. The two sides have noted while ousting President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta.
Talks between West African nations and Mali's new junta ended on Monday without a deal on how the country should return to civilian rule following last week's coup.
We have agreed on a number of issues.
Alors nous avons accordé nos violences sur un certain nombre de sujets.
But there are some issues that we have not agreed.
Ibrahim Keïta, whose return to office had been initially demanded by the regional bloc ECOWAS, no longer wished to return to duties.
So those issues, we told the military officers the thinking of ECOWAS and we asked them to go and review. And Keïta said, look, he has resigned. He was not forced to resign, but he has resigned and he is not interested in governance again. He wants a quick transition so that the country will go back to a democratically elected government.
ECOWAS, the 15-nation economic community of West African states, sent a high-level delegation to Bamako on Saturday, led by former Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan, to press its demands for the immediate return to constitutional order. The talks have focused on the transition to civilian rule.
The next issue is that what is the structure and the duration of the interim government? ECOWAS will not come and impose a government on the people of Mali.
La CEDEAO ne viendra pas ici imposer un gouvernement au peuple malien.
Whether elected government or appointed transitional government must be decided by the Malian people.
There have been discussions on both sides, given that at this stage nothing has been set down. It had been noted that they agreed on a number of issues, but there are some issues that they have not agreed on. So on those issues, the military officers have been tasked to go on a review.
Shifting gears now to the corridors of justice, Tagiola Aida, lawyer to the former Mauritanian President Mohamed Abdelaziz, has noted that allegations, or rather no allegations or charges, have been made against his client, the former President Mohamed Abdelaziz, who was released after weeks' detention in the offices of the police in charge of the fight against economic and financial crimes.
Former Mauritanian President Mohamed Abdelaziz was released by police early Monday after undergoing week-long questioning over suspected embezzlement.
Il n'y a aucune allégation, il n'y a aucune accusation.
There are no allegations, there are no charges, there are no reprimands. It's just that the police fighting economic and financial fraud summoned him for interrogation. He refused to answer because, with good reason, he says he's a former president and therefore enjoys constitutional immunity under Article 93 of the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania.
Constitutionnelle inscrite à l'article 93 de la Constitution de la République islamique de Mauritanie.
Aziz, who's 63 years old, seized power in 2008 and served 2 terms as president before being succeeded in August 2019 by Mohamed El Ghazouani, his former right-hand man and ex-defense minister. Aziz had gone to the headquarters of the General Directorate of National Security on August 17th after police went to his home and asked him to cooperate with investigators.
Il allait faire une conférence de presse.
He was going to make a press conference in which he wanted to interact with the Mauritanian population, but in the end, to our great surprise, just the day before the press conference, he was arrested. Now I can't say whether this was a witch hunt or not.
Est-ce qu'il fait une chasse à la sorcière ou non?
Aziz has been kept at arm's length by Ghazouani since leaving power. Little more than 4 months after he left office, Parliament set up a commission of inquiry into his affairs. He also failed to answer a call to testify before the commission in early July. MPs then swiftly approved a law to set up a High Court of Justice that would be empowered to try presidents and ministers in cases of high treason.
Je suis très soulagé pour...
I'm very relieved for him, first of all, because it was very brave of him to be able to hold out until the end of this by saying that he didn't answer any questions during all the time he was in the form of custody. And secondly, I am relieved for his family members.
Et puis deuxièmement, c'est que je suis soulagé aussi pour les membres de sa famille.
Among the issues probed by the Commission, according to the sources in Parliament, were the handling of oil revenue, the sale of state property in the capital, Nouakchott, the winding up of a publicly owned food supply company, and the activities of a Chinese fishing company called Polio. Nyakundi Kelvin, Africa Focus.
Elsewhere, Egypt's Garbia region is the heartland of its jasmine harvest. The aromatic oils extracted for perfumes from the region make up over half of the global supply, according to international trade figures. During the harvest season from June until November, picking begins around midnight and finishes a few hours after dawn each day. It is a tough job, but a hard-working picker can harvest as much as 11 pounds of petals a day. While it is cooler to work after dark, the key reason harvesting is done at night is because it is only then that the flower fully open.
And quick hands because we only reap the small blooming flowers.
Egypt's jasmine product in the season, which starts in June until November, is around 5 tons of jasmine. The coronavirus during this period negatively affected the export of company sales between 50 to 60%. There are some competitors to Egypt in jasmine production, such as India and Tunisia. That's why we are trying to produce the best quality we have.
That's all here on Africa Focus, but keep the conversation going on our social media platforms as Switch TV Kenya, Joel Chacha M on Twitter, and as well on Facebook, Switch TV Kenya and Joel Chacha. Send in an SMS via 22299. My name is Joel Chacha, and our sign language interpreter is Tracy Dorcas. Until next time, do have yourself a good day.